Mixing with Mike, boot camp tip, foundational, sectional, and transitional tracks. Every mix starts with a strategy, or at least it should. When you open up a mix and you lay out the tracks, the first thing you need to do is to separate your tracks into three basic types. There are foundational tracks. These are tracks that go through the majority or the whole of the production, that really underscore or act as the foundation for the song. Think of it like the foundation or framing of a house that you're going to build, right? You have to set out a design. You have to have plans about how big you want to make it and how you want to lay out and what size you want all the rooms to be, how many floors, etc., before you start construction. Same type of thing with the mix. So when we go through a mix, what I do is I divide up tracks into three basic modes. One are the foundational tracks. These are the tracks that go through the whole song. Now, in this particular mix, we have some tracks that occur all the way through the song, like a couple of these keyboard tracks that are here. The guitar tracks, which pretty much go through all the song. You see I've muted out some sections for some drops. The lead vocal, which goes throughout the entirety of the song. And the drums, which go throughout, along with the bass, throughout the majority of the song. Now, at first you say, well, this is almost everything, okay? And this is a very simple mix by and large, but what we have here are sectional tracks as well, that are these keyboard parts that appear in the second hook and in the outro section. We also have background vocal parts, and these background vocal parts appear in the hook sections in some verses. So when we lay the mix out, what we have to do is set a foundation or set a balance or design for these foundational tracks that act as the structure, so that when the sectional tracks come in, they can fill out spaces. They can actually fill out their roles or serve their purposes more effectively. So, for example, if you have a rock mix and you have these big heavy guitars that you want to really stand out in the chorus, and you have acoustics that are running in the verse, one strategy might be that you have the acoustics sort of spread very wide, all of the drums and the vocal and the bass right in the middle, almost mono, and now you have these big areas that are open in between the acoustic guitars and the center image stuff, which is all the rest of the rhythm section instruments and the vocal. Now when you bring those big heavy guitars in, if you bring them right in that middle section and put like a nice big chamber sound on them, now you can get this power of it filling out this space that it wasn't there before, and you get this density and power to the track that can then go back to the verse and feel like it relaxes and opens up. A simple strategy like this is a very powerful way of effectively making a mix work. Now all you have to do is deal with the transitions between those different things. Now, transitional tracks, which are the third type, there are everything from tom fills to cymbal crashes, risers, all of these types of things. Sometimes they're just simple keyboard notes that will carry you over from one section into the next. Think of it this way. When you lay out the mix, you have a foundation. So in this case, we have the drums and bass, and the drums and bass are acting as a foundation. That's a very simple thing. But what I've done here is, rather than making them stereo, I've monoed them all up. And this is a classic technique that you see a lot in mixes today. Serban Genadlik will take his whole rhythm section and put it right in the middle, so that all of the vocal tracks and all of the sectional tracks and keyboard tracks and things that have a lot of space and openness can now have all these wild 3D sound effects on them, and it sounds like the mix is just huge. You're just completely enveloped in this world, and there's this beat churning away like a big freight train right in the middle. It's a very powerful, effective technique. So here I can place these instruments right in the middle. And that acts as a foundation for the other parts in the song. Now, if I bring in the vocal can sit right over the top of that. So I can lay the vocals out here.
Me get up and me fresh up and say yes, Lord. Me dress up with the best up on me left yard. A straight positivity me manifest, and me know upon my blessings. John and go press pause.
And there's a main keyboard part that spells out all the chord changes, so I'm going to bring that in.
Me get up and me fresh up and say yes, Lord. Me dress up with the best up on me left yard. A straight positivity me manifest, and me know upon my blessings. John and go press pause. Go down ahead hate tracks, that's the best part. Cliff, line up a rhythm, me have a tune for bless.
Now, with the other parts here, I have guitars that work out to the sides. So with the mix now with those guitars out to the sides, I now have a field, with this keyboard somewhat towed in, so it's somewhat mono, right?
Me get up and me fresh up and say yes, Lord. Me dress up with the best up on me left yard. A straight positivity me manifest, and me know upon my blessings. John and go press pause. Go down a head tracks, that's the best part. Cliff, line up.
Right, so now I have this foundation in this open space. When I come to a section here, and I don't have these particularly loud, but when I come to a section here with the sectional tracks, for example, let's go to something that's more effective like the hook background parts. If I bring those in, oops, hit the wrong button.
If I sound just right, then me ready to fly. Like a bird in the morning, me take to the sky and spread me wings like an eagle. I soar high over people. Play this in your vehicle. Your headphones are your Bluetooth speaker. This is the stress reliever. I'm feeling good, I'm feeling fine. Feeling good, I'm feeling fine. Now gonna make nobody blow my mind. I'm feeling good, I'm feeling fine. Feeling good, I'm feeling fine.
So now those background parts fill that in between section, and there's plenty of room for them. I can make them as clear and as loud and as big as I want them. Those are the guitar tracks. If we go over here, you can see I kind of have them sort of spread out, and that's sort of somewhat in that 9 o'clock, 3 o'clock area. And then I have keyboard parts here, and those keyboard parts can kind of fill those lanes as well, just to add a little bit of depth and texture.
I'm feeling good, I'm feeling fine. Feeling good, I'm feeling fine. Now gonna make nobody blow my mind. I'm feeling good, I'm feeling fine. Feeling good, I'm feeling fine. Now make no negative.
So now that I've devised the strategy, and again, this is a pretty simple mix without having it be a lot of parts. We'll get to later videos where we get into that in more depth. Now I can really devise how I want to work each of those elements. I can make the guitars brighter. I can make them warmer. I could do anything I want with them because they're way off to the side and there's nothing really interfering with them. Now with these keyboard parts that are here, all I have to do is blend those in with the background vocals that fill that same space. I can create contrast between the two so that one kind of stands behind the other, pokes behind the other. I can make the background vocals lift higher than those tracks and those tracks sink lower, and play around with it, different reverb, different compression settings, and create contrast that allow those two things to coexist within that same space without interfering with each other. So the approach here is very simple, but it starts by understanding the role of each of the tracks, strategizing them, putting them in the correct places so the foundational tracks will run throughout. Think of that as the framework of your house, of your mix. Think of the sectional tracks as filling out those spaces in between, right? You could also make the mix wider. I could just as easily take these guitar parts that go throughout, bring them in narrow, and then when we get to the hook section, make the hook vocals go out really wide, and that would make that hook section sound really big. In this particular type of song, I found it more appropriate to kind of bring those vocals in towards the center and leave the guitars out to the side. Either way could work. It just depends on the style and the music. When you start to get large number of tracks, we'll get into additional videos about how you deal with that. Mostly it's about combining them together so that they sound like one thing rather than sounding like a dozen things, to simplify the mix and make it easier for the listener to not be confused by all the amount of information that's going on. So there you have it. There's a simple tip, okay? Just understanding what tracks are foundational to the song, setting them up as the structure, sectional tracks to fill in the spaces or add depth, height, body, fullness, whatever it is that they're meant to do in that section. Have them serve those roles to fill that out to develop the song. And the transitional tracks, which stitch and go between all the different sections of the song and allow you to transition between them. That's your boot camp tip: foundational, sectional, and transitional tracks. You can find these tips and many, many more and much, much more in-depth information at the boot camp. The boot camp is a 52-week intensive study in the art of mixing with loads of commercial, professional mix analysis and loads of engineering tips, loads of multi-tracks to work with, and just tons of techniques and mixing strategies that are based off of all of the mix analysis of the way professionals are mixing today.